Healing Academy by Tanner Jacobi. Chapter 1. Lux was overthrowing the government again. Both hands gripped a man-catcher pole as she stomped on out, away from the still-burning city walls of Rafter. In front of her, one of the necromancers stumbled walking in the grip of the catcher's teeth, his arms bound to the side. The green grass around them stretched out for miles beyond the city limits, a liberatory white haze rising in the sky. Scorched metal dust filtered the sunlight like a cloud, casting a shadow down over Lux and her former friend, washing out the shades of the nearby maple tree. "We're far enough now," Lux said, her grip sliding away from the lever. The triangular bend at the front of the man-catcher opened up, and the necromancer spilled out, landing on his knees. "You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here." The man tilted his head, looking towards the occluded sun. Such a wispy and scarred mess of a man had somehow gotten out largely unscathed, but his lungs might need a month or two to recover from the ozone in the air. "I'm surprised," he told her, his voice hoarse in a way unbecoming of his youth. "You didn't kill me." "Yeah, not you, buddy." Lux tossed the pole to the side. She wouldn't need it anymore. She traveled light, and it wouldn't fit back in her messenger bag, assuming that it hadn't been damaged by some hilariously deadly weapon. She didn't pack much on her person either. A simple knit sweater vest and leggings dominantly. Her actual protective gear had been discarded on the way out of the city, aside from the scratched-up biking helmet still on her head. She must have looked like a frail senior woman in the state, despite being in her 30s, but that was what poor choices and picking fights with corruption did to you. Gradually, he stood. His hands hung limply free by the waist of his well-worn jeans. He looked over his shoulder, flashing a crooked smile in desperate need of dental work, none of which had come out in the last few hours. "You understand you've solved nothing, yes?" "Probably," Lux said. "You'll get it back under control one of these days, or however it goes. I'm not listening to what you guys say anymore." He frowned. "I know that you think you haven't done anything wrong," Lux said, "but you have. The arc of history will not see it that way. No amount of abstract arguing makes it okay to kill a person for no reason." She pulled her black cloak up to her neck and fastened it. "But I know that won't get through to people like you." He smirked, steepling his hands next to his face. The half-broken, warped rings on his fingers matched the streaks of gray through the heavy eyebrows and receding hairline. "Those like me," he repeated. "See you around, Gordon," she said, staring directly at him. She didn't move. It didn't come across as deliberately ignoring him, like she wanted. "Certainly." They stood apart, staring. Lux forward, Gordon behind. The haze overhead continued to diffuse out into nothing. The scent of lightning carried the breeze, whispers of the last few ozone grenades that she'd thrown at the mausoleum capital. "So, how did you do it?" Lux asked. "The same way it has always been done and always will be." Gordon cracked his neck and turned around. "Where a city forms a government, pieces of it grow to become corrupt. At some point, bureaucrats seek power. The only kind of power that matters is that which we are happy to grant them. Magic, necromancy. And there, they learn to see people as they truly are. Dormant resources. A corpse can be made to bolster one's own force, and so one comes to find opportunities to let corpses form. No, Gordon, I already know that. That's not the question. How did you do it?" Lux said. He frowned. "Deliberate infiltration of a growing power structure certainly helps plant the seeds." He ambled closer, looking away. "Sure, you know you're being the reason everyone hates governments now, right? All of them get ruled by necromancers." She planted a foot on the man-catcher pole. "So all of them revolt and throw your assets out. It doesn't work. Hasn't ever worked." Gordon's smile returned, and he shrugged amicably. "Maybe, but it's quite the boon of power while it lasts, I must say. And you will not always be there, Lux." "I won't. I know I'm only delaying the inevitable at this point, but pushing it back does matter. I didn't help throw a match on the power keg for no reason." She pulled the brim of her bike helmet down over her eyes. Lux wanted a form of central authority besides a horrible dictatorship, but that would never be possible as long as necromancy and its principle of power tempted those to the top. "And you would let me leave for this reason? Our inevitability?" You do still believe in necromancy, Lux. Gordon extended his hand. The warped rings on his bony fingers gleamed in the afternoon sun. Nope. She searched for stronger words. Any of them. But at least we won this time. She didn't even know who we were. Gordon let his arm drop. Slowly, he laughed under his breath, enough to be noticeable, not loud enough to be satisfying to the ear. He wiped an imaginary tear from his eye. Lux, my friend, you haven't. Lux snorted. I'm certain that it looks such a way, but one does not control a city without growing. There is so much more I understand about reanimation, about subverting powers to my own ends, Lux, and I do not plan to squander it. And what of necromancy itself? Rafter has been quite a way station for the movement of other undead forces. Shut up. The most direct rail line from Wilkstown to the east passes through Rafter. I've heard quite a few stories of boldness in that direction. Necromancers enjoyed hiding behind me as a sacrifice against intervention by train. They no longer have me as a buffer, but they are there, Lux, where they were not before. 5 more stand in my place, and they owe me dearly. You're reaching. And never mind the influence of Rafter Free Radio. Outright pro-necromancy messages would have destroyed its credibility, but tampering with adversaries made it so much easier to transport undead without resistance. Lux was silent. Perhaps next time I subvert a city, it'll be one larger, one more important, now that I understand the techniques. And I will do more than this, and I will hold on to this power. He grinned, a cracked-toothed smile. Tell me, in necromancy, you reach for power and gain it, even in the worst failure. But I do not know what the opposite is like. How does it feel to have sacrificed for less than nothing, Lux? You're making me reconsider letting you go. Vindictive to the last. She turned around, taking a deep breath. This is my final favor to a friend. Sorry. Former friend. Below the white smoke, magnesium-hot fires burned on the grounds around Rafter's radio tower. Sections of wall still stood around the township. Those not already reclaimed as raw materials had become hubs of lean-to tents. Lux hoped to never see a cut of mercantile script ever again, but she knew it'd happen again. You don't have any army anymore, so I don't need to mince words. We could end on better terms. You need only return to what you still believe in. And all of what I said will be reassurance. Dude, you have your chance. Fuck off already. Lux departed, back down the trail toward the city of Rafter and its... A close following, Gordon placed a hand on her shoulder and Lux froze. One more thing. Lux twisted to leave his grasp, which only let him reach around to her waist, under her billowing black cloak. His fingers gripped the fabric of her sweater vest, a black mist around his grasp, seething with deep green and cyan streaks. The innervation burned through her skin, muscles, and veins, spreading like a crack through concrete. She screamed. Lux rammed her elbow into Gordon's ribs. She'd heard a snap, though that may have been her own flesh splitting apart like pork rind. Lux knelt, clutching her right side. Already, her head felt hazy. Gordon sputtered and coughed behind her. She let herself fall. All she could do was lay there and writhe. Her kidney would never be the same. Not unless she made it to a healer. It took minutes that felt like hours before Lux could pull herself back up to her knees. She looked over her shoulder. Gordon was gone. It figured. Lux dragged herself over to a maple tree to sit, trying not to breathe too deeply. The pain would go away eventually. She hoped the radio messages of revolt had gotten out. Someone approached. She could hear sneakers on the grass. Lux rubbed her eyelashes, breaking the seal of dried tears, but still unwilling to move from her sitting spot under the maple tree. "Do you require aid?" asked a soft, maidenly voice. Yes. Her eyes stayed closed. Knees hit the ground next to her. What happened? Necromancers harvested one too many people. I fixed that. Rafter is free. The young woman rested a hand under Lux's right arm, just above the wound at her waist. Lux opened her eyes for real and looked down. Thank you. Congratulations, the healer said. The damage from the blistering red burns had been done, leaving a swath of scabs and already dead skin. This won't take long. under the healer's touch. Her insides lightened, her organs tingled with relief, and blood pumped through to the dead flesh. Blisters faded, becoming as white as a cloud, and then sealed into fresh skin. Lux's pulse slowed, her body spreading out its vitality into the wound, and it was gone. Rather than necrotic, half-flayed skin, it had become a hard, angry red patch, like a shallow and wide burn. Just like that, with a touch and some concentration, the potential mortal wound had become but a water-boiling accident. She flashed a weak smile up at her savior. "Do you have any other injuries?" the healer asked, pressing her hand to Lux's shoulder. Lux didn't answer. It hit her as she had the full attention of an honest-to-life healer. The full getup even, a red and white button-down coat, curly pink wig, smooth and entirely scar-free skin. And those scarlet sneakers. She looked so interchangeable. It was glorious. Meanwhile, Lux looked like she'd been dragged through an alley next to a gravel factory. Her cloak had such a deep innervation hole that it bored all the way through her argyle sweater vest. The deep grooves and cracks all across her skin didn't extend to facial wrinkles, but that was all that she could say for them. "Only that one," she finally said. "Are others injured?" the healer asked. "Many," Lux said, "but no one's in critical condition. It doesn't matter, though. Everything's back to normal already." The healer stood. "It does matter. Every injury can be fixed." "Yeah," Lux said. "I know." The healer stared. Lux must have missed a point somewhere. "Every injury can be fixed, should be fixed," the healer elaborated. "Can't argue with that," Lux said, wriggling her arm out of the cloak. Lux twisted the garment around and slipped her hands back through the opposite sleeves. Wearing it backward with her collar up in her chin was better than exposing the sight of what used to be her injury 30 seconds ago. "It's been a while since I talked to a real healer." "We're real," the healer smiled, eyes bright despite the burning town. "I'll get to the rest of your burn after triage." Pfft, no need to spare her feelings on calling it a burn. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" "Yes, actually." Lux stood up. "Hold on." The ache of her half-healed innervation washed out in rivers of endorphins. "Crap, I had a whole list of questions for when I found a healer again, but I can't remember when so much has happened." "I understand. Walk and talk," the healer said, turning to the township. Lux followed, trotting along in sneakers of her own, once white, now worn out to yellowness and stained. The shoelaces were coming apart, just like her hair, prematurely silver and dangling in sweeping arcs all around her head. The lines of age around her eyes were few, but sharper than the point of her chin, or her stare at the burning buildings. Lux pulled her hunched shoulders back, trying to present some confidence in a moment of importance. "Okay, I remember. Which way to the academy?" Lux asked, thinking back to Rafter's radio message. Every other question didn't matter. "It's 8 kilometers down Sunrise Trail, and then you take a left between 2 boulders." The healer shaded her eyes with her hand to keep closer. Smoke poured from the top of the nearest section of wall. No one lingered there. "I'm terrible with trail names." "Back the way I came from." "Right," Lux coughed. "Don't get closer," the healer suggested, and took a bandana out of the pocket of her coat. "I need to get a bike," Lux said, reaching back to tighten her backward collar around her mouth. "There's no rush," the healer explained, and tied the bandana to cover her nose. "To tell you the truth, I think that you should wait until the second time they accept newcomers. There are always problems in big projects the first time." "No kidding. I'm getting there as soon as I can. It's important. Listen, I heard the announcements. I can't miss this, for a bunch of reasons." The healer's eyes crinkled, probably a smile. "You sure? The world always needs more healers, but I know it's not for everyone." "I'm sure." Lux coughed again and stepped around the fallen brick. The smoke in the air thickened. She could still see through it, down to the trail deeper into the township, where the indistinct shades of buildings took form and where children ran around in the streets. Gotta find her bike. Any would do. But only hers had her good duffel bag on it. She'd left it near the entrance somewhere. The healer followed. "If you'd like to learn, I think today is the last day to get into the first wave, but really, I heard the final head count was this morning. It's okay to wait." Lux nodded and pressed the heel of her hand against her head. Just my luck, isn't it? The healer dug around in another coat pocket. Lux's chest tightened in faux laughter. I thought I had time. They were counting down the days on the radio and everything. But when I made it here to Rafter, and there was a damned government with the roots already in place, She kicked at a scrap of paper blowing in the wind. A script note, singed and worthless. Most governments tried to institute some special currency. Some people would probably still use them for days, but without having to answer to a central authority, they'd be scratch paper soon. I couldn't let necromancers do their thing again. I understand. The healer took out a wide vial of pale red liquid from her coat, stoppered with rolled paper. I thought it would be fast. People were already pissed. Someone was beating a skeleton over the head. There was this whole curfew thing. People were being forced to work and stay out of the big guy's ways. Honestly, I just gave the resistance all of the ozone grenades and said, hey, if you need someone to charge into battle, that's me. I'm the chick. So it took a few days. She coughed again, walking around to the back of the smoking wall. Just my luck, though. I had to be a hero and accelerate what was going to happen eventually, but now it's too late. I blew it at the last minute. The healer tilted her head. She shook her potion vial. That's the problem with trying to make a difference, Lux sighed. Is that your bike? The healer asked, pointing. Lux peered along to the back of the wall, now that the two of them didn't have their vision blocked by the front, and narrowed her eyes. Oh. She shuffled up to the bike, its sleek frame and matte-finished metal tube blackened by smoke, its chain slightly rusted and the tape on its curly handlebars peeling. But the battery rods along the framed tubes looked as fresh as ever, and the laser nozzles in place of a headlight shined with its chrome finish, and her duffel bag on the back mounted had stayed intact. With a quick squeeze of one hand on each wheel, Lux confirmed the tires still held air. This is it. Have fun, the healer said, walking past Lux and the bike. Where, though? Lux wheeled the bike away from the alley wall. I missed the final head count. I'm screwed. I didn't say that. Here. The healer handed Lux the vial. Lux took it and raised an eyebrow. The smoke and the leftover burn sucked, but it didn't you need a potion suck. Sweetheart, just tell them what happened. I'm sure it's not a big deal. Lux pressed her lips together and closed her fingers around the vial. And what if they say no? The healer smiled, her eyes full of patience. When the founders tried to talk me into joining them last month, they didn't strike me as the government, you know? Lux stared for a few seconds. The healer put a fist on her hip, still smiling. You should probably go triage, Lux said, and walked her bike along the wall. I don't even know why you answered my question at all. Because every person matters, and that means every healer has to matter too. Lux pulled her helmet down and brought her bike back into the withering grass outside of Rafter. She clamped her teeth around the vial of potion, gripped the handlebars with both hands, and pedaled. Pebbles and dirt crunched under Lux's bike tires with each crank of the drivetrain and twist of the handlebars. The black radio box dangled by the wires near her hand. No time to fix it. The breeze blew past Lux's cheek, wicking the evaporating sweat from her body. The trail of dirt stretched out before her, flanked by enough trees that she shouldn't be pedaling this fast. The landscape was mottled here, patches of grassy fields and sparse springtime woods intermingling at random, held at bay under awnings and swung right along with the path around the beekeeper. She might have stopped to view a dozen of the hives in that yard in other circumstances. Lux hit a bump in the road, lifting her front wheel on the dirt, and she leaned in closer to the handlebars to maintain balance on landing. The hardest part of feeling pressure for time was the uncertainty. The sun was lowering. She was late, but how late? No one could say until she got there. She pumped the pedals hard, relying on the electrical assistance to carry her up the hill without slowing. Her lungs ached from the aftermath of smoke inhalation. Could she salvage at least an aid to her ailments? No. What would really hit the spot right now was some damn water. Her teeth ground on the glass vial in her mouth. The plants grew more and more lush as she biked, branches whipping at her head and deflecting off her helmet. Twigs scraped the fabric of her duffel bags on the back of her bike. She stayed close to the right edge of the trail, where saplings and shrubs sprung. Not much longer. She'd been such a dork to that healer. What kind of person complains about their life after jumping on board with a friendly neighborhood anti-necromancy revolt? The trail zigged unexpectedly, and Lux leaned with a hard left, so sharply that the pedals ground against the dirt. She swept past a thick and heavy tree, avoiding its branches right over her head. The front wheel wobbled with her struggle to get it back under control, but in moments she emerged from the light woods. She was out into a longer tract of grassland, and a row of jagged boulders delineated the path on the left. Lux panted, spittle slickening the glass vial. Here. She banked another left, gentler but pedaling faster. She popped a wheelie and landed her front tire in a wide groove between two boulders. Constructed barriers only had gaps like this one on purpose. Her back tire bumped on the lip of stone, and she rode on through, past the walkability barrier, through to a wide and open clearing. A rolling hill of grass practically shined with a verdant color before her, with only the occasional chestnut or maple tree springing up more like decoration than visual impediment. And through the grass, a desire path led. Lux rode her bike through, past a few trees, over fallen chestnuts, through maple leaves, until she finally deigned to take a moment for herself. Lux squeezed her brakes to stop at a chestnut tree. Its foliage rustled around her helmet, gentle and serene. The ashen burns wouldn't work their way out of her lungs so soon unless she took the help given to her. Lux pried the vial out from her clenched teeth, and on the wet glass surface, white impact dots marked the spots where her incisors clutched it. Lux lifted the nozzle to her mouth and sucked down the potion's contents, a sweet vinegary tang. Not suitable as a spice, but palatable. It went down like hot honey. Lux gasped after drinking and sighed. Her lungs felt normal again. She could never get over the immediacy of the feeling of wellness. Necromancers made a big show of their power. Healing only sometimes worked like that, and despite the potion not being water, Lux felt better hydrated and could even handle the sting of her waist. She cranked her bike pedals and rode off, through the tree-dotted meadow, over patches of clover and dandelion and little fuchsia flowers that could fit a dozen on her fingernail, all in swirls and lobes of population density. A squirrel ran past her. A chestnut popped away when she rode over it. The lowering sun filtered through the arboreal greenery, casting her long shadow across the grasses. Strands of invisible spider silk caught on her face, too. Maybe being late was okay. The academy had picked a good spot, somewhere around here. A minute of biking from there, the desire path ceased, and the meadow opened up. In a wide field, long-abandoned concrete sprung innumerable cracks, reduced to well-set cobblestone mortared with weeds. On the concrete lot, a sparse crowd chattered amongst each other, clustering around two well-used bike racks and a single bonfire. They sure looked the part of aspiring healers. Lux couldn't make out the details that far, but she could see the red and white coat here and there. The warehouse loomed above them. It could have been a church once. But now there was no way to tell. Graffiti covered every wall and corner of the building as a rainbow mural, all the way up to the ring of opaque shoulder-to-shoulder glass windows just below the rooftop. Someone had drawn a cartoon in extreme close-up. Others had sprayed their names, and others just drew penises. Whatever structure it used to be, it was a half-finished network of masonry for a half-started project, and Lux had to wonder if hosting the academy was its second work in progress or its 200th. Her bike's near hub clicked as she walked to the nearest rack. She pulled the duffel bag off of the hitch mount and slung it under one arm, with a strap over her opposite shoulder. With a few tugs on the wire, she removed the portable radio box and clipped it to her bag's bandolier-like strap. All ready. Want a marshmallow? Lux glanced over to the fire pit. Some guy strolled toward her and pointed a stick. It was a big stick. Maybe a discarded fishing pole. The marshmallows on the end drooped right in front of her face, even though the guy was easily 10 meters away. She glanced between him and the skewered sweets. "They're tasty," he said. Lux plucked one. She crunched into it, a hardened, caramelized shell filled with lava. Perfect. "Like it?" he asked. Lux approached him, and he lifted the super-long marshmallow stick. The guy looked like he'd rolled through a clothing depot and picked only the worst cut-offs, including neon-orange socks within black sandals and garish yellow and purple striped shirt as a centerpiece. Was that a tie? Lux swallowed her marshmallow and cleared her throat. "Yes, thank you." "It's my secret recipe." Lux kept her cool for 1 second. She laughed. "And I'm 2 for 3 on that joke." He extended his free hand and winning smile on his face. Lux took the hand, wiping her mouth on her still inverted cloak collar. "Nice meeting you. I'm Lux." She shook carefully. Her fingernails were always sharp for reasons that she'd never figured out, and she hadn't filed them away this morning. "Julio. But call me JJ. He was built like 4 fence posts stuck to a beanpole. Even his head looked blocky and narrow, with coils of hair. Like her, he didn't fit the typical skin tone of rafters or breadbasket plains in general. Lux had pastier skin than the locals, and JJ was black. Lux had been inadvertently tanning during her travels, though, what with no longer walking around at night, so maybe she looked like the majority after all. "I don't think I saw you during the head count. Might have missed you, though. I can't really tell with your collar up." Lux unsleeved her arms from her cloak and turned it around, re-exposing her burn. "Does my hair not give it away? I'm not of the schooling age." "There are 3 different people here with gray hair. You'd be surprised." He tapped his foot a couple of times. "Yeah, you missed the final head count." Damn it. But she knew that she'd be late. I know, I was busy. Is there still a way to get in? Has the actual academy part of the academy started? Some of the crowd cheered and clapped their hands for someone popping a wheelie on their bike. JJ turned and lowered the end of his branch over the bonfire. "Come here. They're gonna have this great big introduction in a few hours." "Who's they?" Always ask where the power comes from. Lux stepped up alongside him. "They're calling themselves the Founders. 5 of them. Different specialties. Hey, hold on to this for me." Lux grabbed the pole. JJ stepped aside, and Lux shifted her footing, arms and shoulders engaging to support the leverage. Given the length of the fishing rod, she shouldn't have been surprised at how heavy it felt. The less-cooked marshmallows on the end bobbed up and down with her efforts to keep it straight. "Yeah? Is this good?" "Yeah. They've got these titles. Marquis is going to say no if you ask him, but I think I figured out who the softies are. I bet I can work this out." "Really?" Lux said. "I didn't think that it would be that easy." No, you gotta promise me something." Lux's face fell. "I'm gonna get a friend, and when I come back," he gently tapped on the side of her head, grinning, "I want a perfectly cooked marshmallow." Lux didn't laugh at that one. The hoops that she had to jump through for this. An uneasy hour passed. It was probably a joke. Lux couldn't take the risk, though. She had to stay trustworthy. She mingled with the gradually dispersing crowd, learning about the prospective healers. Coats and sneakers usually meant a fan of healing itself. Someone who loved the principle of restoring life. Other people told her about the wonders they felt in magic as a whole, which bothered Lux. They realistically only had 2 choices, and they could have picked necromancy. Still, more chose it just because it seemed interesting, and a long tail of individual explanations filtered in through conversation after conversation. They wanted to go camping in the most idyllic patch of nature. The voice on the radio sounded like a hunk. Their brother dared them to. They needed to get over their drinking problem, even though previous healers struggled to undo it. They were on the run from a bad family situation, and one person said they'd wanted to be an oracle, but well, the crowd got a little quieter after that. It had happened before. Some inheritances of magic went extinct, for whatever reason. Tiny, nigh useless ones never made it out of prehistory, but every time one lost its final practitioner, it ended completely, like a species, and ever since decades ago and decades there before, the battle in the background had spurred technology onward. Conjurers whisked interesting weapons out of the wind, any that they could think of, and the resultant copycats had grown into lions. People kept miniaturized, high-powered lasers on their bicycles these days. Oracles had helped advanced communications, and radios grew to outperform the practitioners themselves. All of it was in service of fighting back against necromancy, and it was going well, for a long while. The supernatural tumor in society grew only slowly. But unavoidable issues came with fighting a form of magic with a fundamental law, the principle of power. It was practically tailor-made to win the natural selection of inheritance long-term at terrible price. Obsession with power guaranteed a hierarchical pecking order of a domineering mindset. That would not have been so bad were it not paired with what necromancy actually did, which was raising the dead and turning them into useful resources. The two simply could not mix with morality. The extreme competitive squeeze to be better than any other necromancer, lest one become their puppet, led one to find ways to have more corpses to work with. Thus, a pressure cooker of both self-debasement and the consolidation of power into the strongest hands. And that would have been bad enough if they hadn't found a way to work together. They had been a cult since day one. A cult, an exploitation of a vulnerability in human psychology. People could be subjected to conditioning that they became fanatics for a cause, and practically identical to one another in mindset. That was what it took for necromancers to work together, at least somewhat. There was still usurpation, politics, and vigilante culling of the weak, but nevertheless, the necromancers outside of the cult, ones that would voluntarily give up that much power when the very core of their magic drew them towards consolidation, were vanishingly rare, and even those served the greater necromancy in practice. They made excellent propaganda tools for those who thought that they could use death to do good. If someone could be convinced to learn necromancy while solemnly swearing to only use voluntarily donated corpses, they would be convinced to not ask questions about those they find, and necromancy dragged one, kicking and screaming or otherwise, down that slope. And even that would not have been so bad, were it not for the black diamonds. Pooling of immense resources under millions of hours of research led to those beautiful and terrible gems. They were why conjuration and divination were whittled to nothing. After so long of humanity finding none on every continent, with sensitive Magirum equipment, they'd been officially declared extinct. Without conjuration, there were no more snap-of-the-finger weapons, only ones to be made manually. This left anyone and everyone with only fire lances, electro-whips, miniguns, ozone grenades, and more that had been reverse-engineered. No magic left, nothing supernatural with which to beat back necromancy. The weapons were nice at least. One could extract wildly high energies from anything vaguely weapon-like, even storage devices like batteries. Some people jokingly considered that it would be a real inheritance of the world, thus the rarity of the governments, if they weren't overthrown immediately, by the very well-armed population, they became corrupted by necromancers, insinuating themselves into the free power structure and then publicly lasered out of existence. And as for the actual fight against necromancy instead of the governments, the loss of conjuration and divination put everyone at an impasse. Militias disbanded. Some gave up. Others decided to join who they couldn't beat. Necromancers, meanwhile, were doing something. The malaise of defeat was where Lux's knowledge ended. But the breadbasket plains still had healing, something not to actually be taken seriously. Slowing the bleeding was not actually a solution against the inheritance of magic that could not lose any power on its own. It was like trying to avoid drowning in acid by turning the faucet from full blast to a laminar pour. Stopping it couldn't happen, but Lux had to try, with the one remaining tool, even if trying looked an awful lot like making s'mores. Finally, JJ returned, his hands in his pockets and new briskness in his stride. The crowd had dispersed, the youngest and oldest aspirant now inside the warehouse, though the front entrance. She could tell that it was the front because of the plaque above the doorless arch, but its engraving read, "Be direct," which made no sense. She still felt lonesome. Concrete crunched under JJ's shoes. Lux grinned awkwardly. "Sorry about that. I got Cyril to distract the moo-moo chick. Ready to go?" "Yes, and thanks," Lux said, lifting the fishing rod and steadying its tip somewhere above JJ. "I didn't know what kind of doneness you liked on marshmallows, so I cooked one of each." They formed a beautiful spectrum of white, brown, and black above JJ's head. "The ones in the back are lightly toasted, and the one at the tip was on fire for a second. How did I do?" JJ grinned, lifted an eyebrow, and plucked a golden brown one from the pole. It bifurcated in his hand, and he crammed both halves into his mouth, whereupon he chewed messily. "You know I was messing with you, right?" "Yes, but, you know." She laid down the fishing pole. "What if you weren't?" "But I was." He lifted both eyebrows and swallowed. Needs cheese." JJ led Lux through the front entrance. Inside, repurposed warehousing racks dominated the layout of the open floor plan. Painted over iron girders rose a quarter of the way to the ceiling. Many were covered in wooden boards or filled up with long-disused cardboard boxes, but others had sheets of plywood nailed between them to form enclosed spaces. Still, more remained untouched, merely racks to be filled. Lux reached out to stick her fingers in one of the sharp holes of the constellated beam, and indeed, the tiny sparkling light inside was real. With less than half of the fluorescent light fixtures overhead actually working, some genius had woven rows and rows of twinkling lights through these racks, bathing the entire inside of the building in a soft glow, one not quite washed out by the setting sun from windows high above. Lux smirked. As pleasant as the warehouse maze looked, Lux didn't have the time or reason to get lost. She followed JJ along the wall to her left, letting the concrete guide them in a straight line. Graffiti covered the inner walls, but without blanketing every inch of masonry like it did outside. Whenever her eyes weren't on JJ, Lux stole glances down the aisles, those rows between shelves and their destinations. Some had already started up a community closet, sorting mothballed clothes between curtains and atop shelves. Elsewhere, wide-open lockers had been bolted to beams, with a take some, leave some sign hanging above them all. Someone's tennis ball bounced down a row. Lux picked it up and tossed it back, hoping that it returned near to whoever lost it. "Who will we be talking to?" Lux asked. JJ adjusted his tie. "I know there's two who will say yes if we ask, so we're asking a maybe so we get more than half on our side. There's this fuzzy, shabby-looking lady. Goes by Otis, I think. You'll know her when you see her." "We should know what to call her before we ask her for favors." "Yeah, that's why we're going to dawdle and chill until we catch a name first," he grinned. "Unless I break something. That's always fun when you're bored." JJ turned down the aisle. A twinkling electric light gave way to the candlelight with milky wax dripping from holes in the beams and collecting in saucers on the floor. Lux followed JJ down, watching her step. Tattered books took up shelves just above eye level, above the domain of the candles. A blend of scents perfused the air, mainly cinnamon, which warmed her nose like the wind from a hairdryer. It was overpowering. She sneezed and caught an echo of her voice. "Stylish." "Don't mention it." Lux wiped her nose. Several shelves down, the wooden boards between racks began, turning the cinnamon spice library into a corridor, one that ended in a copper-toned curtain. JJ pressed his ear against the plywood next to it. "As much as I like that you're—" Lux trailed off, seeing JJ raise a finger, as if about to make a point of his own. But he just lowered his arm, walking his hands down the opposite plywood with two fingers. A candle flickered. He did not have time for this nonsense. Lux did one big sidestep around JJ, forcibly pushing past his suddenly raised elbow to hold her back. She stumbled and fumbled against the plywood walls, knocking loudly against the metal beam behind it. "Pal, no," JJ said, leaning over to pull her back by the shoulders. Lux squirmed out of his hands and stepped through the curtain, letting it part around her face. Inside, the plywood walls enclosed a space that could have been a large closet in a normal building. Candles packed densely around the single rack of shelving in the middle, bathing the room in brilliant yellow. The shelf itself had been converted into a desk, at which sat a short, bony woman, her narrowing eyes peering at Lux. The woman's faded, torn set of sneakers caught Lux's eyes, along with the red-white cloak. But this one looked different. No buttons, just some safety pins. The vertical white stripe in the center was still there, but not the matching splashes on the shoulder. The woman stared, with a reserved disinterest. Oh no, Lux had seen people look at her like that before, and it usually reflected a person so powerful that they could ruin Lux's life in a moment, and so sure in that power that they'd raise the bar on what they considered a threat. If she could avoid doing something stupid by accident, she'd be in the clear. But everyone made mistakes, especially her. "Do you require aid?" the woman asked, sitting up from her desk. Despite the salt and pepper hair, she moved with the elasticity of youth. Lux raised a hand to the side of her neck. "No, not in the way that you think." "I'm sorry. Are you Miss Otis?" The woman laced her fingers together at her waist. Speckled eyes stared across at Lux, a sandpile of color variations, just like the liver spots all along her cheeks. "Esteemed Bruchelle Otis," she said. "State your request, if any." Her voice carried some clarity and strange enunciations. Any became Annie. and hard consonants were heavily aspirated, like she were whispering and speaking simultaneously. JJ pushed past the curtains and knocked his knuckles against the adjacent plywood wall. "Hey, esteemed Rochelle. Friend here got a problem," he said, now walking around Lux. "Blew in from elsewhere, a bit late on the draw." "As is expected in some cases," Rochelle said. "Is this in relation to your injury, madame?" Lux adjusted her cloak around the burn site, sliding the strap of her messenger bag back and forth. "Sort of. It's Lux, by the way." "Nah, that's a different thing," JJ said. "Like I said, she's just late. Need to get up to speed. So how's the introduction thing going to work later today?" Rochelle stepped around the desk, standing straight and unhindered. "A formal introduction to the inheritance of healing will be hosted in the auditorium, which has been arranged at the rear entrance of the academy." She lifted her hands out forward, shoulder-width apart. "I do not recall what we designated it. It's an introduction. Our naming conventions confuse me. I don't think that there is a back entrance, unless you mean the big chunk where all the shelves stop being there, but if you did, I dig it," JJ said. "As I am told, but I had no part in the physical manipulation of the academy as of yet," Rochelle said. "One should expect to remain seated for the sum total of 1 hour, during which 5 speeches will commence, one from each founder, myself included, and Ramil's being delivered by Yvonne, for reasons of personal choice. There will be exercises to perform during the process. A further introduction to the introduction itself is not required. The initial education will describe its own terms." "Yeah, JJ said. "When is this?" "A quarter until 8 o'clock, precisely." "And this'll be to everyone who got into the final head count, yeah?" Lux thought back to that plaque. "Indeed, Marquise and Ramil have prepared the ledger of names such that—" "Add me to the ledger," Lux said. "Screw it. Do something stupid, but on purpose. I know it's final, but I want to be a healer." JJ shifted, his eyes left and right, still grinning. Rochelle, meanwhile, laughed. "Your enthusiasm is appreciated, though this isn't a matter of sanctity of paperwork. Gracious, no. I require time for final preparations, and from there, the curriculum as a whole." She smiled sadly. "Perhaps you may join during the next wave, if another even occurs, I'm afraid." Lux thumped her hand on the desk, careful to miss the candles and the singed document. She stared into Rochelle's eyes. "Is there anything that I can do to change your mind on this one?" Rochelle shook her head. "You certainly have a passion for it, but it's unlikely." Lux sighed. "Unlikely always meant impossible." "Then who else can I ask?" "Pardon?" Rochelle said. Meanwhile, JJ stepped up to the desk and stared at the candle, his hands in his pockets in a crafted-to-be-nonchalant pose. "If you won't change your mind, then I'll ask another founder, however many it takes to get approved." "Dear," Lux tapped JJ's shoulder. "Where's the next founder?" JJ blinked. I guess we could go wait for Dr. What's-His-Name to get back." "Yes, for you two would not normally have been able to enter my workstation," Rochelle said. "But he took recess from his paperwork in my library to investigate a ruckus." JJ snickered. "Then fine, I can wait, and I'll ask him." It was as if Rochelle, perhaps the whole academy, arbitrarily gate-kept a new realm of power from her. She could feel frustration rising, pumping blood into veins on the side of her head. She knew there were reasons. She knew she wasn't doing this for the greater strength, but the emotional seed dug its roots in regardless of what she told herself. "Or I could find the ledger and put my own name on it. What then?" "Dear, your concerns are noble." "Then, if they're noble, why not let me?" Lux gritted her teeth. "Stay calm. I didn't start a revolution in rafters just to be told no. Please, who do I talk to?" The room went silent. JJ blew out the single candle. Rochelle lowered her arms, her empathetic expression falling serious. "A revolution? When?" "Just now, just today. I got on my bike and left an hour after the mausoleum burned." A knobby hand rose to Rochelle's lips. "I hadn't expected. I knew it would be soon, but—" The radio box buzzed on the messenger bag strap as Lux twiddled with the dial wheels. "Listen for yourself." Static cut through the heavy cinnamon sooty air. The radio dial passed by disjointed notes of music and amateur chatter until it settled on a more composed snippet of voice. Free Radio Green Station, your station for the Breadbasket Plains. Our marathon of new legal music continues after the break with Dead Stay Dead. Steven's taking over so that I can bury my mom back in her original grave. What a concept! The radio jockey fake laughed, and a thundering bass line of electric guitars faded in behind his voice. Remember to hug your friends and family and listen to Rafter Free Radio. It's Dead Stay Dead! Lux clicked it off. Rochelle stepped past Lux and put a hand on her shoulder. I shall gather the others. This calls for an emergency trip to care for the wounded in... She closes her eyes. Rafter. The town's name is Rafter. Life itself. Thank you. Anyway, they'll be fine, Lux said, looking over her shoulder. There's already one healer there. One, Rochelle repeated. And were that enough, you wouldn't still be wounded. Rochelle strode out the door, with Lux power walking to follow. Yeah, but it's already happened. Anyone who's going to die already has. There are several issues with that statement, but the point, Rochelle continued, with Lux now having to break into a jog to keep up, is the care of the injured, which is within our power to do, and that, madame, will be done. Rochelle hurried around the corner, leaving the fuzzy borders of the library and rejoining the twinkling electric lights. Lux could hardly keep up. Then who's handling the introduction? Lux called out, feeling not at all sprightly behind the woman, her elder. Anyone, Rochelle said, with her voice calling back. Dr. Fastilius, she called out, raising her voice further before dipping around another corner. Lux came to a stop and caught her breath. Great. She slumped her shoulders and turned, ready to stomp back into the library area, but Rochelle's voice pierced through the network of shelves well enough that she could still be heard, distantly. Someone else's voice joined hers, that of a man, both muffled. Given that she shouldn't get in the way any further, Lux cupped her hands around her ears and closed her eyes. Yes, I've heard confirmation, Rochelle's muffled voice continued. Of all the times, the man answered. Fastilius, Lux assumed. I agree. Gather the others. Knowing Ramil, she's out the door already. I heard yelling, joined another woman's voice, smooth and focused. Well timed. Rafter threw out its necromancers, Fastilius said. Really? Good for them. I'm going there too. Yes, but someone has to stay here, Fastilius continued. Rochelle, me, and obviously Marquise will go. And I'm sure Ramil. That leaves you to stay and teach. What? No, after necromancers, you need someone like me. A set of footsteps thudded, followed quickly by two more. And that is what Marquis is for. The necromancers are already thrown out, Yvonne. Do we know that? Rochelle spoke up. Our informant should have an answer. The footsteps grew closer. Lux leaned up against the rack, stuck her 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled. Soon, the 3 voices arrived, Rochelle and Fastilius running, with Yvonne striding close behind. Lux hadn't known what to expect of the founders, but Fastilius could have just stepped out of a men's fashion magazine. The square haircut, the jaw that could be used as a masonry trowel, the shoulders' definition, the only thing that ruined it was the striped tie. It fumbled the red and white healer's color scheme so much that it looked like a candy cane. Yvonne towered over both of them, a muscular and baby-faced woman with blonde hair pulled into a ponytail. Lux didn't look too closely. She dimly registered that Yvonne was the palest founder so far, in a very informal tank top and a triple layer of black leggings. Madame Lux, Rochelle spoke up. I heard it, Lux said, raising a finger. They're all running away or dead. At least the ones involved in taking over. I made sure. Then their armies are gone, Fastilius said. He nudged Yvonne with his shoulder. Stay. Yvonne nodded dourly. Okay, but I won't like it. Fastilius adjusted his tie. I know you will not. I should remind you that we're reasonably close to Rafter, so while it is unlikely, if a running necromancer's destination turns out to be here, we need you in defense. Yvonne lost interest mid-sentence, the look of a woman who had been redundantly explained to before. But the complete explanation earned a hardened, purposeful gaze. Yvonne cracked her knuckles. No one here is getting turned into army meat. Not on my watch. Rochelle reached up, way up, to put a hand on Yvonne's shoulder. My friend, you will be splendid. She nodded back with a sly smile. I know. It'll be fine. But why are you standing around still talking to me? Rochelle smiled. She ran off down another orthogonal path between shelves units. Dr. Festolius followed, his dress shoes clanking in his wake. With the pseudo-halls going quiet again, Lux watched the two founders run, back towards where she remembered the front entrance to be. Lux scratched her hairline. She'd have to get used to this. The adrenaline of the confrontation left her body, and her confusion turned to fatigue. Without even thinking about it, she bowed her head, pressing her hands against her face. Yvonne loomed over Lux behind her. "You okay?" "Almost fine," Lux spoke through a muffling of her palms. "That scar looks bad." "Is it an unfinished healing?" Yvonne asked. The shadows across Lux's eyes lowered, blocking less light. "Yeah. How'd you guess?" "It stops at the exact depth." Cool fingertips brushed the edges of Lux's wound, and they didn't hurt at all. "Mind if I fix this?" "Please do." Lux rubbed her face and lifted her head, blinking. "Innervation hurts like nothing else." Yvonne's fingertips glided across Lux's injury. A sense of growth, of satisfying exertion, twinged across her skin. Cells pushed up, sheets of healthy skin unsheathed from under the red raw one, and the ache completely vanished. In seconds, the unfinished act of triage found its other half. The smooth, supple skin looked fresh, and she could feel cool air against it, like a callus had been sanded off the waist instead of a burn, with fresh nerves instead of numbness. The relief overall made Lux wipe her brow and sigh. "Thanks. No problem. If anything happens, and you haven't learned to fix it yourself yet, come right back to me." Her hands brushed down the frayed edges of the big hole in Lux's vest. "That should go back to normal sensitivity in a few days. You might want to pick up a new sweater sometime, too." Lux looked over the shoulder, to the crouching founder. She never really understood protective instincts, but could respect them. But, now that that was over, she had a goal to pursue, and only one founder to talk about it. "So, you're more hands-on than paperwork, I take it?" Yvonne nodded, gesturing with one hand for Lux to continue. "I don't suppose that I can get a seat at the introduction?" "Sure," Yvonne said without a moment's hesitation. Lux blinked. "What?" She laughed, turning back to the shelf. "Otis made that much harder." "Yeah? Who cares? You escaped here from Rafter, so I have to help you, don't I?" she explained, mirth in her voice. "Fighting, not escaping. And that's what I'll say if anyone fights me on it." Yvonne led Lux back to Rochelle's library, the fibers of Lux's vest rubbed against the new patches of skin, and she felt so much more complexity in the weaves. She remembered why she preferred yarn knits now, the comforting, warm texture. She barely recognized the return of cinnamon to her nostrils, and completely spaced out for a few seconds it took Yvonne to lift the folder from the high shelf, one so far that even Yvonne had to stand on her tiptoes to reach it. "Here it is," Yvonne said, fanning open the glossy black file with one hand. "You know, we were hoping for more interest. Getting one more person could be good. Sign here." She held out the folder to Lux, and on a yellowed sheet of paper she pointed to the next open line. The page contained nothing but rows upon rows of signatures and printed names side by side. Each aspiring healer's name had a printed translation, signed off by one of the founders. Mostly one solid column of the same exact slant, written over and over again. RRR. That was it. Finally, with just a few clicks of a pen hooked to the side of the folder, Lux signed her name, writing the 3 letters directly atop another with a flourish of the X. She felt good. She clenched her fist in excitement. "Welcome to the Healing Academy," Yvonne said, smiling. Her eyes drifted to the side. So did Lux's. JJ walked up to the two, holding the blown-out wax candle from Rochelle's office. "Do you think she'll be mad if I eat this?"